The UK only has two futures. One where most people are rich, and the other where there's deep, deep poverty for most people living in the UK. That is the harsh reality. But we've got to get back to why the UK is the way it is right now. As of recording in 2026, the UK isn't just broke, but straight up poor. Like, literally not... They don't own assets, is what I'm trying to say. And yes, there is a difference between being broke. Broke is just temporary, right? Which is normal in economic booms and busts and recessions and all that. But being poor... God, like, literally, that is a long-term situation of having no money. But this wasn't always the case, because back in the 2000s, the UK was actually rich. The government had assets, the government's debt payments were lower, and there was good social mobility. From what I've researched, there's no absolutely perfect time of like what time to be born and whatever. But from what I've researched, the 2000s was actually a pretty good time to be alive and for general social mobility and all this. Then the 2008 crash happened and the UK had 14 years of the Conservative Party. For the people watching, imagine having 14 years of the Republican Party. Then they get into power in 2010 and they do this thing called austerity, which is, in this case, was decreased government spending and increased taxes for 14 years. Between 2010 and 2024, give or take a couple years depending on who you ask, but basically that's the period, right? This is one of the best ways to try and kill your economy. What happened in the US is stimulus kept demand up, companies kept investing because they knew customer spending wouldn't collapse, and labour markets recovered faster. The UK's austerity meant public sector spending dropped right when private spending was already down, so you got a prolonged drag. Growth was slower, productivity suffered, and the UK is still behind on it even in 2026. This is reason one of why the UK is like this right now of 2026. Now on to the second reason. In 2016, the UK did a Brexit referendum which led to the withdrawal of the United Kingdom from the European Union. The people in power said the UK left the EU because the UK was controlled by the EU. The UK at the time was paying to be a part of the EU. But you want to know the real reason why people voted to leave. It was not because the people in the UK in 2016 didn't want to take orders from Brussels. Let's be real, it was because of xenophobic reasons and racist reasons. And you would hear it all the time in the news and like it behind closed walls. You would hear it all the time. It wasn't for economic reasons, it was for other reasons. And for the few people that actually owned a lot of the news outlets in the UK, there was actually a motive to block reforms from the EU to the UK, essentially regulate them. After decades of sustained and unrestrained anti-foreigner abuse, misinformation, distortion, the UN Human Rights Chief in 2015 argued the UK to tackle tabloid, because that's what it is, a load of tabloids honestly in the UK, hate speech after migrants were called cockroaches in the Sun newspaper. Also, for the wealthy, the option for the UK to leave the EU meant no requirement to abide by strict new financial regulations, which meant the wealthy could pay less tax. The UK leaving the EU is a form of adding lots of red tape for trade and making it harder to collect taxes, which is the last thing you want if your goal is to grow the UK economy, assuming that you're reinvesting those taxes into the actual UK economy. Now for the third reason, COVID-19. Which happened between 2020 and 2023, not only added to the national debt, but also, and still is as of 2026, a huge hit to the UK labour supply. This is pushing up wages faster than productivity can justify. This means inflation and the wage productivity divergence. Even in 2026, everyone in the UK can still feel these effects from COVID. Now on to my final reason why the UK is the way it is, the fourth reason. The 14-year government got out in 2024 and the new Labour government got in at 2024, but the government's balance sheet and the management was so bad that when it got handed over to the new Labour government, there was still not much wiggle room to improve things, even if you don't want to do anything radical. So I'm recording this in 2026 and the government is slowly building housing and is just chugging along. The future is really uncertain. The economic environment is tough, the job market is tough, the apprenticeship market is tough. A lot of people are simply not making it, making the whole country unstable. They bring up the graphs on the news and it just doesn't match the lived reality on the ground. It feels like the UK is in sort of recession right now, and the next general election isn't until 2029. That's 3 years from the time of recording. 3 years. The way I see it, there are two paths the UK could take, and I'll explain the best case scenario. The UK government says the UK economy is so bad that we generally have to fix it, and here's how. fix the cost of living by buying assets like UK Water, making UK Energy compete with the private sector, owning public transport, and building way more houses. If the UK realises that owning assets means having control over the prices and not renting for the privilege, then the cost of living will come down, bettering people's lives. The UK goes full speed into making jobs and basically paying the private sector to give people jobs, otherwise they're NEETs for life. And there will be some people that are NEETs now that will become NEETs for life. The NHS would not only be still around, but offer a better service no matter if you are poor or rich. The productivity puzzle will be solved. The UK would navigate AI so that people will have a decent standard of living. Eradicate child poverty. The UK would have a high social mobility. This would lead to near utopia in the UK. That's the best scenario the UK could take, but there is a other scenario. The worst scenario for the UK that it could take. There could be a scenario where the UK government comes to the room and says, these rights are getting in the way. So the UK government is going to completely strip you of your human rights, leaving you completely vulnerable to the state and companies taking advantage of you with no recourse, and I mean no recourse. You could have your civil liberties stripped down, you could be taken advantage of, humiliated, or maybe killed, but as long as the British courts give the green light, then it is justified, and that's pretty scary. There could be a scenario where an increasing amount of people in the UK will be in wage slavery. You wake up in a slum like a house/flat full of people because housing is so expensive. You then get called in to do a shift at this 0-hour contract for low pay, long hours, and if you complain, you will be fired by a text or email, then replaced the next day. That is the kind of situation that could happen. You then open your phone that is rented, open up a digital monopoly platform that extracts rents from you. You then use and watch something which requires a subscription. You then try to go to protest to attempt to better your own life, but you see a notification on your phone blocking you from public transport because your social credit score is too low. We then see CBDCs weaponized against the average person. Let's say you need medical attention, right? The NHS is heavily defunded and privatised from the inside out. It will take ages to see someone, but you need care fast, so all you can do is either go private or you just don't receive any care. A good chunk of the UK right now is drugged, and this chunk will only increase over time. You will own nothing and be happy. And what I mean by that is you'll be absolutely miserable and own nothing. This will be a lot of people's futures in the UK if the UK still exists, because the UK is a collection of countries, and you know, England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, one could break away, but that's for another time. In conclusion, the UK government could make the UK part 1984, and it would have a rigid social structure with very little social mobility, especially after AI, because the UK is particularly exposed to AI. I believe it's around 70% of jobs will be affected. That's the whole UK economy, which is crazy to think about. You would also have 1984 surveillance of the digital type, like the modern style, not really analog 1984, you know, like in the book. Then you would have a 1984 authoritarian state where you would have very little positive freedoms and basically not any negative freedoms. You could also say, you know, part Huxley, Brave New World, large population of people is drugged rather than getting down to the root cause. You could say part neo-feudalism, part techno-feudalism, part Matrix, part Terminator, part Blade Runner, part iRobot, part Minority Report, Low Life, High Tech, Cyberpunk. You know what? It does sound pretty cool putting it like that because those are good movies, but in reality, it is, you know, low quality life, cyberpunk, dystopia. It's kind of like a jumble of all that. And you would also see, like, with very little social mobility, which is actually really scary because this is like, you know, post AI pretty much. Or we could see, that's the dystopian part, but we could see a more utopian, kind of like the first example that I put of basically the UK self-correcting itself. So there's these two futures where you could have an absolute dystopia or a utopia. And that's basically what I've been thinking, and I've just put it into this video. So if you like the video or you want to comment the video, because I'll definitely respond to all the comments, you know, go ahead and I'll see you in the next one.